topics to intentionally collide. I'm also manning the live stream, so don't mind that. Also, if you haven't heard, the heat and AC in this room can be a bit loud, turning on and off, so just be aware of that and be prepared as we continue the conversation. I also want to remind you that there will be a Q&A after the discussion, so make sure to be preparing those questions, and a book signing at the end of the program, and Learning Environment is here available for purchase. I also want to let you know that this event is in collaboration with Teaching for Change. Teaching for Change provides teachers and parents with the tools to create schools where students learn to read, write, and change the world. Please go and check out their website if you're tuning in through the live stream, and check out their table right here in person after the program. And now a little bit about the book we're going to be discussing here tonight. Join award-winning New York City educator Dr. Jared Fox in and out of his classroom on an excursion that goes beyond books and lectures to reimagine teaching and learning. Through a blend of real-life examples and practical commentary, readers will see how Fox created localized learning opportunities for his students out of canoeing on the Bronx River, hiking in the Catskill Mountains, and other unconventional approaches. Fox invites teachers to create dynamic and transformative educational opportunities by implementing experiential learning based in their own communities. With Fox's heartfelt wisdom and practical know-how, readers will be empowered to reconsider and redefine what teaching and learning can and should be. And now a little bit about the author we have here with us tonight. Dr. Jared Fox is an award-winning educator and a former secondary science teacher, department chair, coach, mentor, and instructional leadership team member, currently working as an independent education consultant at the intersection of science, the environment, and social justice. Other published works include his writing as a chapter author in From White Folks Who Teach in the Hood, Reflections on Race, Culture, and Identity, edited by Dr. Christopher Edmond and Sam Seidel. Learning Environment, the Substack, and a growing list of academic journals. Additional information and opportunities to connect can be found at jaredfox.education. And now I'll invite him up to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Madison, for that beautiful introduction and welcome. And thank you to everybody who is here tonight. It's nice to see some friendly, familiar faces and to meet some new faces as well. I know Monday nights can be tough, so I appreciate everyone for taking some time out of their beginning of their week to be here with me and us tonight. And also, I really am happy to be here in collaboration with Teaching for Change and Busboys and Poets, given both of the organization's missions. It's something that aligns deeply with my own personal values and what I was trying to do when I was in the classroom in New York City, and my current work today as an education consultant working at the intersection of science, the environment, and social justice. A little bit more about me more recently. I was in New York City public schools for 17 years. I started teaching in the South Bronx, and then I moved to a school in Northern Manhattan. And during my time there, I learned different ways to engage students in the world around them. And more recently, my family and I moved to DC. My wife was a high school principal, and having just come out of the COVID-19 pandemic, I was not ready to go back into a school in a new place, in a new city, with a new building and a new administration and new students. And knowing what it takes to be a high school principal, I felt it was the right decision to step back a little bit, support our young family and my partner. And during that time, I was able to think critically about what I had done for the last 2 decades in the classroom, and think about some of the successes that I had, and write a book about it. And that's what brings us here today, is this book, Learning Environment. And I just hope to share some of the practices that I use with my students that are applicable not just in New York City, but I think anywhere their educators are looking to connect their students to the world around them. Welcome, welcome. But because I'm a teacher, and I know some of you are teachers, I do not want to just stand up here and talk. I want to try to make this as engaging as possible. So one thing I want you to think about, and hopefully we'll get some audience participation if that's possible, is think about a meaningful learning experience that you have had, whether that be a recent learning experience as an adult learner, or a memorable learning experience as a child or when you were a student. And I want you to share what was that experience and what is it that made it meaningful and memorable to you.
And I'll pass the mic just so we can pick it up on the live stream, if you all don't mind. I know we're a small group.
For the live stream people.
Just for the live stream. It also gives you a bit of power. So you could just raise your hand. I'll come pass it to you.
Again, that question was, think of a recent or distant learning experience that was memorable. What was it, and what do you think made it memorable to you? I will call on you. I will call on people.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Not afraid.
I'm coming this way.
So I don't know what this says about me, but an educational experience I had that seems formative to me happened in high school, and I sort of cruised through school, doing well, until I was placed in a chemistry class, an honors chemistry class. And I could not see how different elements combined and all of that stuff. And I was getting C's and everyone had A's. And I went in and I talked to my teacher, and she was amazing. She said, all right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna set up times to meet, and we're gonna meet after school. And she met with me, and I got C's through the whole year, but on the final exam, about 2 weeks before the final exam, it seemed like things just clicked. She tried the whole year different ways of explaining the same thing, right? But by the end of the year, it seemed to have clicked, and I got a 96 on my final exam. But it took me a whole year, and it took this teacher meeting with me every week, and taking every tool out of her box to try and communicate to me how these things worked. And I have a lot of respect for her. She passed away some time ago, but I think she changed a lot of lives in that way.
Thank you for sharing. Who's next? We can do one or two more.
Okay, right here.
Thank you, Radian. Thank you.
Okay, hi. I'm a current student, so this is fresh in my mind. But last year I had a professor who sent us out to do a lot of field work. It was a class about migrants in the city, and I remember going into Chinatown and having to write a paper about what I saw and my experiences. And so I think getting hands-on experiencing, being out in a community that I otherwise wouldn't have been, is something that has made me learn in different ways other than just being in the classroom. And I'm here actually for an assignment for school, but I enjoy going out and seeing what other communities of DC have to offer, and I think that's the best way to learn, just being in the presence of something new and different rather than just being in the classroom.
Thank you for sharing. You're setting me up perfectly. This is wonderful. Not a plant, not a plant. One more? If you just came in, the question was, what was a particularly meaningful learning experience that you've had either recently or in the past, and maybe what made that learning experience memorable or meaningful for you, if you'd like to share. Let's say one more.
I would say, building off that, and to give Teaching for Change a shout out, as part of the working group, we go on sort of field trips every once in a while, and it's, I think, there have been a lot of meaningful learning experiences. One of the recent ones was to the Phillips collection, and so we got to learn from the arts educators there and sort of see in action. They took us through the steps that we could do with our students, and I think that combination of being able to experience it for ourselves and also do it in community with the group of other educators who are trying different things, and we could just learn from each other, was really powerful. So thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so for me, and I read about some of these memorable learning experiences in the book, from childhood I was outside all the time. I lived in the suburbs of upstate New York outside of Albany, kind of the suburban rural divide, and I was on my bike exploring my backyard and the creeks and the streams of upstate New York, surrounded by nature. That was my happy place as a child. And when I was in the classroom, those were some of the same experiences that I tried to replicate with my very urban students. A little more challenging in the concrete jungle of New York City, but definitely possible. But that was my foundation for my learning experience. And then also I went on a lot of professional learning journeys. I think if you're in education, you know that you're always trying to get better at your craft. And one way to do that is to surround yourself and seek out like-minded individuals and organizations like Teaching for Change to get better, to become a better practitioner. So for the first reading here of tonight, I want to share about a particularly memorable learning experience for me that informed a lot of my teaching practices that I'm going to share about in the classroom later on. And this learning experience is from not too far away, here in the Mid-Atlantic region in Baltimore. Over the summer that I transferred to my new school, I had the opportunity to participate in a week-long professional development institute facilitated by the nonprofit EL Education. EL, which stands for Expeditionary Learning, is a pedagogical approach that embraces the idea that students learn best by doing. In contrast to my first school, which followed a more traditional teaching model where each class and classroom operated as an isolated and independent unit, EL schools adopt a more interdisciplinary lens. For example, instead of asking students to take notes and then study for a test, EL schools center curriculum on learning expeditions. In this approach, teachers create learning environments for students that encourage them to learn content and acquire skills through examining case studies, becoming and interacting with experts, engaging in hands-on projects, conducting fieldwork, collecting data, and celebrating what they know by sharing it with an authentic, often public audience. However, at the time that I entered the Yale Summer Institute, I was relatively unfamiliar with what expeditionary learning was and how to incorporate it into my teaching practice. Thankfully, the Institute, which was hosted in Baltimore's charming Inner Harbor, was led by EL educator experts. During the week of professional learning, my group actively participated in an expedition that focused on the threatened health of the Chesapeake Bay, a natural wonder and essential economic engine of the Mid-Atlantic. As I was learning about the Chesapeake, I realized the power of embracing out-of-school trips as opportunities to engage in fieldwork, a tenet of EL curriculum design. According to Yale, trips out of the classroom should not be viewed as isolated learning experiences, but instead as fieldwork opportunities for students to collect and then analyze data upon returning to the classroom. In this manner, students act as scientists, sociologists, or any other researcher in a particular field of expertise, investigating the answer to a question or solution to a problem. At the EL Summer Institute, this meant that my PD group had to determine the health of the Chesapeake Bay by collecting water samples from Baltimore's Inner Harbor, examining the impacts of a local stormwater waste collection system and celebrity dubbed Mr. Trash Wheel, speaking with local scientists, and visiting a blue crab research station. Collectively, these fieldwork experiences, which also happen to be quite joyful, and the data we analyzed in regard to the health of Chesapeake Bay in our teacher's classroom, forever transformed my view of what trips could be and how students should learn outside of school. So that was a transformative learning experience for me, and I think in some ways it sounded a little bit about like some of the learning experiences that were shared. I was not necessarily grinding it out for organic chemistry to get from a C to an A, but I think the experience of being outside and using my hands was in some ways just as rigorous of having to do something that is difficult and new. And that was one of the things that I saw immediately as a science teacher in my classroom of being the benefit of getting students outside and not just going on field trips, which are great. Let's not be throwing any shade towards field trips. Kids love field trips because they get out of class. They get to do something a little bit different. It breaks up the monotony and routine that sometimes can happen in the classroom. But looking at field trips as field work is a lot more intentional. It also happens to relate to two of these themes that are coming up throughout the book, the first being localized learning and the other shifting the gaze. So these are two things that I write about quite a bit. Localized learning is the idea that you're connecting what's happening in the classroom to the world around you. And sometimes when students are reading or learning from textbooks, it can seem a little bit out of touch and decontextualized from their day-to-day. So I was always trying to look for and find ways to localize students' learning by bringing the community to them or them going out into the community. And by doing that, I found that I was able to shift the gaze of my students. I think sometimes we're all a little bit prone to tunnel vision. We go about our days and we don't necessarily always see everything that's happening around us. And we need those routines. We need that kind of focus so we can get through the day-to-day lives that we have. But as an educator and as a teacher and as an environmental science teacher, I was trying to constantly break my students out of that tunnel vision that they maybe had because of the screens in their hands or just the fact of going from A to B and not really thinking much about it. So when we went outside of the classroom into the world around us, we were trying to shift the gaze by looking critically and deeply examining different parts of what was in our school neighborhood. That could have been something like a street tree census or going across the park to see what was happening in the forest across the street from our school. And those things were also woven into the fieldwork opportunities that students had. The next thing I want to share about engaging students and helping them shift the gaze is this concept of something called a mystery piece. It's really just a fancy word for a hook or a way to engage students. And again, for me, that always meant how can I hook students in environmental science, the things that are happening in our neighborhood, in our city, and in our school. And this is another practice that I drew from the expeditionary learning framework that was utilized in my classroom. And it can happen over multiple class periods. It can happen over a single day, or it could be the first 5 to 10 minutes of a lesson. And the purpose of a mystery piece is for it to spark more questions than answers. And when I could do that with my students, I knew that I had them hooked in the learning process that we were going to do. And that is going to be my next reading. And that reading is going to be about the image that you see happening next to the mystery piece infographic. Yes, that is a New York City sewer. No, that was not sanctioned by the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, but that was part of the mystery piece. How often do we think about the sewers beneath our streets? And let's just say I was grateful there were not any enforcement officers around while we were doing this. So this is the mystery piece about our city sewers, and this was from the opening of a unit about the sewer system or the wastewater treatment system in New York City. My students are standing in a circle near the sidewalk outside our school. Our visiting urban explorer, Steve Duncan, is crouched next to a sewer cover. Steve, wiry with a shock of blonde hair extruding from his black baseball cap, is dressed in jeans and black boots. Resting on his shoulders is an orange safety vest with reflective yellow and gray stripes that cross at his chest. A carabiner dangles from his belt loop, holding an assortment of flashlights and a pair of fingerless black gloves. Steve's entire look, a series of intentionally utilitarian fashion choices, allows him to hide in plain sight, as what we are about to do is definitely not approved by the NYC Department of Environmental Protection. Steve unclips his gloves from the carabiner and slides them onto his hands. He then picks up a long and heavy rod-like piece of angular metal. The manhole tool he's holding sharply curves at one end into a triangular-shaped handle. On the other, it hooks and narrows into a sharpened point. Firmly gripping the tool, Steve nonchalantly asks, "Who wants to see what it looks like inside a sewer?" My students creep closer as Steve takes the pointed end of the metal rod and inserts it into one of the small openings on top of the sewer cover. Firmly gripping the triangular end of the tool, Steve bends his knees and slides the sewer cover off its moorings with a deft and forceful tug, emitting a loud scraping sound of heavy metal on asphalt. To my relief, no heads turn our way. Wisps of steam and a slight but surprisingly not too noxious smell greets our olfactory glands. Students crowd around and peer down into the exposed sewer system, a piece of infrastructure that rarely sees the light of day or captures the public's attention unless something has gone terribly wrong. Steve unclips the flashlights from his belt loop and passes them to students. They quickly flip them on and direct their light beams into the abyss. The illuminated depths below street level reveal the iron rungs of a ladder built into a decades-old column of brick and mortar. Below the ladder's last rung, light reflects off a softly flowing current of gray water. Steve explains, "What we are seeing is a combination of the wastewater that flows down the drains of your school building and the water that was collected underground from the streets during the last rainstorm. This commingling of wastewater and stormwater is a hallmark of older cities like New York, and together they create a combined sewer system." While students take turns peering into the sewer, others ask Steve questions about where the water is going and what will happen to it when it arrives at its destination. Their questions are perfect mystery piece ponderings to open our next unit on the operation of our city's sewer system and the health of its harbor. Okay, so that was the mystery piece, and then for the rest of that unit, which this is the opening to the unit of a unit all about New York City sewer system, and the rest of that unit entailed students. The next day I brought in a jug of what I called sewer water, and that was really me just making fake sewer water, but I told students that the water was from this sewer, and that would just added on to the mystery of what we were doing in class. And I use these tricks and techniques to really help engage students in the learning process, and this happened on the street outside our school. So again, going back to localizing learning, shifting students' gaze, and then giving them this intrigue about what was about to happen in their learning process, all allowed us to dig deeper into the content, context, and skills of what was happening in the classroom. And the rest of this unit was students learning about how wastewater treatment works, learning about systems thinking, about smaller parts being part of a greater whole, and us even going and touring a wastewater treatment plant. And from there, we learned that this combined sewer system that you hear about in the excerpt I just read causes environmental problems in New York City. So every time it rains in New York, and also in DC to a different extent, the sewage from our homes, the wastewater from our homes combines with the stormwater from the streets, and that combined wastewater flows into the rivers and streams, which can impact the health of the waterways. So fecal coliform bacteria can go into the waterways, and obviously that's not great for us for swimming and the critters that live in there. So when my students learned about this issue by studying data and examining these things from the wastewater treatment plant that we visited, they became a little upset and angry, and that led us to some environmental action, which is a big part of my science teaching. It's not good enough just to know the content. It's not good enough just to have the skills. When we identify a problem with the data that we're collecting, we need to do something about it. And I think that's what Teaching for Change is about. I think that's a little bit what Busboys and Poets is about, and the communications and conversations that we have here. And that is what having this mystery piece helped us do as well. So we've covered, let's see, we've got the localized learning, shifting our gaze, the mystery piece, and the last one here that I already mentioned a little bit was field trips as field work. And this is some of the work that I did with my students that you see here on the top left. The top left, that was from an experience where we went to the Bronx River. The Bronx River is the only freshwater river in all of New York City. And we went there with the express purpose to test its water, to canoe on the Bronx River, to sketch the Bronx River, to do seine netting on the Bronx River, and then to use that data that we collected in the field to bring it back into the classroom and see if things could live in the Bronx River. Because the Bronx River was at one time a beautiful backwater. It was even thought of as being a resource of drinking water for the city. But over time, it was degraded and destroyed. And today, although there are still parts that are quite beautiful that wind through the Bronx Botanical Garden and the Bronx Zoo, there are also parts that are very industrial. And also there's stigma associated with the borough of the Bronx, unfairly so. So one of the reasons I wanted my students to go to the Bronx River was to see beauty in a place that maybe is not often thought as being beautiful. And once you get past sometimes the hard exterior of a place, you see some of the beauty that's within it. And again, it was tapping into these local experiences. It was helping students shift their gaze about the different places and spaces that they inhabited. Some of my students were from the Bronx River. Some of my students lived a stone's throw away from the Bronx River. Some of my students didn't think anything could live in the Bronx River. So by going and testing the water for ourselves and seeing that, yes, things could live here, we went canoeing on the Bronx River. So that was a great experience for my students. This is another fieldwork experience. And then some of the other projects you see going on here was, again, these local experiences where students wanted to do a little bit more, and this is centered on the park across the street from our school and the garden that was attached to our school. A big theme and portion of my class was teaching about environmental justice, which is essentially the idea that everyone has the right to a healthy and pollutant-free environment, but also the way to be meaningfully involved in the decisions that are being made. And there's that second piece, the meaningful involvement, that is often overlooked and sometimes often overlooked in the classroom. So that was one thing I wanted my students to do, was be meaningfully involved in shaping the environment and correcting some of the issues that were within the neighborhood of Washington Heights. So that entailed us going and planting trees, building these planters here that you see in the school garden, and then also organizing. This is a student here who was advocating for climate change and climate justice. And also the top picture over here is of students' vision for a clean air green corridor, which is where they wanted to close the street outside of our school and create a pedestrianized plaza. And this all started from just getting students outside to shift their gaze, to look at the trees on their block, ask questions through these mystery pieces that we have. And one thing led to another. We brought partners in, and before we know it, kids were organizing. And I say that in 15 seconds to make it sound really simple, but really it just starts from a simple act. Deborah, you and I were talking, you said you got on a listserv, and before you know it, here you are, right? You become entrenched in these things and the work that we do together. One thing leads to another. You find like-minded individuals, you find your community. Sue, you and I were just talking about how some of the issues that are happening today can seem so overwhelming, and we throw up our hands thinking about what can we do about it. And really at the end of the day, we can only do what's within our locus of control. And for me and my students, that meant stepping outside the steps of our school building and seeing how we could get involved in our community to make it a little bit better. And the one thing that's beautiful about working with students is that young people just have this appeal that other people want to work with them. They gravitate individuals and organizations, and students would present at community board meetings. People would stand up and give them a round of applause. That's not normal at a community board meeting, right? But if you get kids in the room, they just have that optimism and idealism that's infectious. And the same thing with planting trees with kids. Like if you never planted a living thing with a kid, it's something I would definitely recommend to put on your bucket list. And in this picture, students are planting, I don't think American chestnut trees, but that was something that they were doing in my neighborhood. The American chestnut was once a ubiquitous tree from Maine down to Georgia. People said that a squirrel could run and never touch the ground from Maine to Georgia because of the number of chestnut trees. It was a utilitarian tree that was, think cradles, cribs, and coffins. It was used for everything. But the American chestnut tree was a utilitarian tree that was used for everything from cradles to cribs to coffins. So it was seen throughout your entire life. But because of an introduced fungus from Asia, all of the American chestnut trees across the United States are basically functionally extinct. But because of organizations like the American Chestnut Foundation, they've been able to hybridize them through genetic engineering or just traditional crossbreeding with a Chinese and an American variety. And because of that, these new chestnuts are resistant to this fungus. And my students were a part of the first replanting of this hybridized American chestnut tree in the park across the street from our school. And that's kind of what they're doing here. And I was just in New York City as a part of this book launch a week ago, and the organization that I work with called the New York Restoration Project that is still actively planting and monitoring these new chestnut trees was happy to inform me that they're over 50 feet tall, and they're now doing a 1,000 chestnut challenge to plant more of these trees across the United States. And my students had the opportunity to be the first ones to plant these new trees, and it just speaks to the power of what can happen when you step outside of the classroom, blend and blur the lines between the community and the classroom inside, and start small and then generally find your people and build up. So I just feel really fortunate and lucky to be a part of these inspirational projects and still work with a lot of those partner organizations today through my work. Still here in DC, I'm back and forth between New York quite a bit. So that is a lot of what I've done with my students. I have one more reading, and then we can do some questions. How's that sound, Madison? Good? Yeah. And this reading is about the Bronx River trip that I shared. So that top left corner picture. And it also has some poetry in it, which I thought was appropriate for the location and venue that we're in. Okay, where am I? I thought this was it. 1, 2, 3. Oh yeah, here we go. Okay. Logistics complete, our group would set out for the park, and after completing a lengthy subway ride, we would clop down the stairs of the subway onto busy Westchester Avenue, walking past auto body repair shops, bodegas, and live poultry slaughterhouses. We would then cross the Sheridan Expressway and slip down a path into a sliver of park nestled between a subway overpass, the Amtrak Acela train tracks, and a network of local streets. The looming remnants of an old concrete plant that provided the green space we were visiting, the fittingly named Concrete Plant Park, would greet us at the bottom of the path only a few yards from the banks of the Bronx River. At the bottom of the trail, the Bronx River Alliance education staff would wait next to a series of neatly arranged canoes, and we'd slowly join them. Once our group had fully arrived, I would look around and smile, feeling confident that the context skills, and pre-trip preparation had set the stage for a science-filled and enjoyable day of fieldwork. Settling into our fieldwork environs, we'd stand in a circle and, mere moments before breaking away into group for the day's planned activities, I would set the mood and outline expectations. I would ask my students, some already donning their personal flotation devices and gripping a canoe paddle, to take turns reading lines from a poem by Joseph Rodman Drake, a native Bronxite. The first stanza reads, I sat me down upon a green bank side, skirting the smooth edge of a gentle river, whose water seemed unwillingly to glide, like parting friends who linger while they sever. And forced to go, yet seemingly still unready, Backward they wind their way in many a wistful eddy. The purpose of reading Drake's poem was to transport my students back to another time when the Bronx River was a bucolic backwater surrounded by salt marshes and farmland. I wanted them to imagine what the natural environment in this place used to be like and appreciate the restoration efforts they had learned about in the classroom and, as a result, benefited from during the trip experience. Through this activity, I will return to the content and context of what we had been learning in the classroom and connected it to our instructional experience in the field. After our opening circle activity ended, content and context successfully revisited and extended. Student groups would scatter across various learning stations. One group would break off with Bronx River Alliance educators for a quick introduction to canoeing before setting off on an estuary paddle. A second would dip a bucket into the river and begin water sampling. A third would start tying pieces of twine around chicken gizzards, dropping them into the river and hoping to catch some blue crabs. Or they would find a quiet place to sit and sketch a drawing of the river and its surroundings. A final group would wriggle into waders before plodding off with seine nets towards the shoreline in pursuit of other aquatic creatures. Confident that all the day's learning components were now in motion, I would then focus on supporting the primary intent of our fieldwork, the assessment of the Bronx River's health. Okay. So that's the Bronx River, and those are the themes that are throughout the book. Those are more pedagogical practices, but it also has social justice critiques throughout about the education system and what we can better do to support students. But I'm also want to be mindful of people's time, and I don't want to overly talk, and maybe we can have more of a dialogue, so hopefully there's some questions out there if people are interested. If not, I can also find another reading if needed.
Okay, we can open it up for questions if anyone has any. And did you want to stay down here or did you want to go back up?
I think we're a pretty intimate
Okay,
group, so
that's cool.
I feel like a little stuck behind the podium, but I know there's the
yeah.
live stream possibilities, but
No, it's okay.
I'll be here.
Okay, that sounds good. So any questions? Okay. Deborah will start us off. Thank you.
One is just to thank you. This is really invaluable work, and I look forward to reading the book.
Thank you.
And I think it's helpful hearing the book, how much it has to do with environmental justice and science. And but I have a question just also about students' sort of spirit. Years ago, a colleague and I co-taught a class at Cardoso High School, which is not far from here.
Okay.
And we had one student from, I think it was from American Samoa, who would just not engage, would always have his head on the table, and we had what I thought was a pretty interesting class, but
Yep.
nothing worked. And then one time we did a field experience and went out to a park and had some investigative purpose. And all of a sudden, not only did he engage, but he became the leader of the class. And so I just wonder if you could talk about just the impact on young people of being within four walls versus, and what it does to student spirits versus being outside.
Yes, thank you for that question, and thank you for sharing that story. And I saw the same thing happening. What was the name of the student? Do you remember? So that student sounds like a lot of my students, especially when I first started teaching, and was really the impetus for me wanting to change my classroom practices. Because when I first stepped into the classroom, I taught I taught my students the way that I was taught, right? And I thought I was very successful in school teaching with that way. It was like, here are the notes, take the notes, study for the test. That worked for me. But when I got into the classroom, I realized that did not work for a lot of my students. It was disconnected from what they were interested in, disconnected from the world around them. They didn't see the relevance or the importance. So that's what inspired me to think differently and expand my view of what's possible and what a classroom looks like. And that's what it takes to tap into a student's lived experience, their cultural competencies, And for me in the Bronx, when I was first started teaching, that was going to the Museum of Natural History, which was a field trip. And I realized that I thought this was going to be this amazing trip. We're going to this world-class institution, the Museum of Natural History. We're going to walk around. It's going to be fantastic. And it was okay, but I realized that if you go to school in New York City, you go to the Museum of Natural History every single year. And it's not as exciting as you might think. So that made me think, okay, well, what is something that we can do in the neighborhood? And I distinctly remember going to a park called Crotona Park, a couple blocks away from our school, and there's an urban forestry program there, and there's a little nature center, and a lot of students never knew that was a part of what they could do in their neighborhood. And that started giving me some light bulb moments about, oh, when we get students outside of the classroom in their own neighborhood, and I saw similar experiences where students that had their heads down. I'll be very transparent and honest about, this book was, and the things that I share, they worked for a lot of kids, but not everyone. And that also has to do sometimes with some of the things happening outside of school, some of the systemic structures and inequities that we can't always control. But bringing students to that park across the street and letting them realize that there's these resources and these experts and professionals right here within their community did give some students those light bulb moments that you're describing, and allow them to reimagine and reimagine what teaching and learning can be. So thank you for sharing that story, and I hope that answered your question.
Okay, see someone over here. Excuse me.
Well, first I'd like to thank you and appreciate the good presentation that you're doing about education. I'm a retired teacher, and I did
How long did you teach for?
something close to 50 years.
Woo!
Yeah. And I taught all levels, everything from pretty much babies up into adult education in one area or another. My specialization is pretty much history and, that kind of stuff, geography, all that other stuff. And, but I've taught other things,
Yeah, so
English, art, all that stuff.
from the littles all the way up to the bigs and any topic possible. So you
Okay.
did it all.
Yeah, I did a lot. I didn't even think about it until it's all done, though, and I'm retired, so.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's teaching, right? Is that you're and
Yeah.
coaching, right?
Right.
When you're out there with students, you're enmeshing it, you're in that kind of, it's all consuming, right? There's no time
It
for
is all
really-
consuming,
yeah, it is.
especially if
It's-
you have people at home that you gotta do that to. But the point that I wanted to show some interest was basically about how did you get received from, get off of me. How were you received from your administration and the parents and the general neighborhood? I mean, because in my experiences, I've had it all, and some of the best learning experiences that I gave for the kids had bad responses from either the teachers or the administrators who were just kind of stuck in their way of thinking and did not see outside the box like you're talking about.
Right.
So in your course of going through this, did you ever have any pushback from any of them, or did you ever have anyone that just wanted to help and come in and be a part of the party with the kids? And how old are these kids you talking about, by the way?
How old were they?
Yeah.
I primarily taught secondary, so 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, older kids.
Hated it.
You didn't like the older ones?
No, it's the middle school kids that gave me crazy. But
Middle school kids are a little different than.
They gave me
But they're
crazy.
they're going through some stuff.
Of course they're going to.
We're all going through some stuff. Let's be
How
honest.
did you respond to that kind of stuff in this process? Of letting them, I guess, spread their wings and blossom and all of that? Because middle school and high school kids too, they're crazy. I mean, it's not that they're trying to be crazy, it's just hormonal,
Yeah.
So what do you do with them?
So I'm hearing two questions there. The first one was kind of, how did my administration slash colleagues react to some of the things I was doing in my classroom that I described. And the second one is just how do you deal with the energy that is young people? Is that fair?
They tell me they're crazy, so I'm not just talking about it behind their back.
I hear you. I hear you. So the first question, I was very fortunate, I think, to be in a school. My second school, I taught in two different schools. The first school was more of a traditional school. Thanks for coming. And followed a more traditional classroom structure. And that was a school where I realized the things that I was doing were not as in line with what they were expecting. And that sought me to find a different school and different place. And thankfully, that school that I landed in had this expeditionary learning framework that I described earlier that embraced a lot of those same practices that I'm describing to you here today. And that was really helpful in allowing me to feel empowered and have a sense of autonomy and agency to do these things in my classroom with my students. And I think that's one of the challenges with a lot of educators today is they feel like they're being micromanaged. I don't know if you felt that way at all in your tenure classroom. It's not true in all places, but sometimes they feel like they need to do a certain thing a certain way, and that can sap a little bit of the joy out of what can typically be a very great experience as an educator. So that's kind of the first question. I just found myself to be in a great place that was doing a lot of the things already. So I was able to rope in my colleagues and find partner organizations that were willing to do these things with me. And by doing those things together, I think the impact was multiplied. In regards to kids being crazy, yeah, I mean, that was something, I guess that was just like an everyday kind of thing and you just kind of deal with it, right? Because it's nice to talk about science and the environment and getting kids outside, but if that kid comes to you and something happened at home and it's impacting them in a way that puts them in a bad mood or causes them to act out, then you're not going to teach that kid anything. That's where you really draw on your ability to have relationships with students and connect with them in other ways. And once you can establish that relationship, which can be challenging at times, then you can engage that student in the learning process. I mean, I would turn it back to you and ask you for some advice. I mean, you had 50 years in the classroom. What were some strategies or tips or tricks that you did to deal with the crazy kids? What wisdom do you have to share?
Well, I found that basically there were two different kinds of crazy kids. Okay,
Two kinds.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's two
Just
kinds.
two.
It's two kinds.
Let's
So
hear
it's more than that, but really, I just broke it down to two.
Thanks for coming.
You know, one group of them are the first group is crazy because they special needs and they just can't keep up. So instead of letting someone know that they have issues, no matter what they might be, a lot of times they've not been diagnosed or treated with anything specific and slip through all kinds of cracks. In fact, I did teach a class one time that was bound to slip through the cracks, and they already knew it, so I worked with the AmeriCorps. And we brought those children, because they were all from the projects in that particular school and in my class. So, you know, we had some that were legitimately handicapped type disabilities and some that just were about to slide out and just make excuses the rest of their life for why they can't read. And actually, they might have been dyslexic and nobody told them. So with that, I found that the kids that have special needs and that can't express because they don't know that they have something different from everyone else. They've always been dyslexic. Why can't you see this backward E? You know, what's wrong with you? Because that's all they ever saw. So they don't know there's something wrong with a backward E, and nobody's telling them that it's backward because that's all they ever saw. And nobody knows that they have this issue. That was I can't say it was an easy problem to solve, but it was an easy problem to recognize. So that if you recognize one of those kind of kids, you have to be alert, because when they can't keep up, they do other things like try to keep everybody else distracted so that they don't have to be accountable, and give them time to catch up if they can, and make everybody laugh, and do all of these kind of things in classroom that just keep your time going backwards. That's one type of solution, but it's also another thing that when some kids are having emotional disability or emotional problems, nobody knows it, nobody tells it. The school doesn't get money, so everybody's ADHD, and you just have to figure out that this kid has an emotional disability as you go along, which has to turn you into some kind of psychiatric, nurse or something to deal with them. However, what I did find in dealing with them is that they just want somebody to understand that they have something that they can't handle. And they don't know why. And they will tend to do other things like, regress into themselves and be hermit, all that kind of stuff, not be popular, be the geek, or just slide in between somewhere and not be seen. Those problems, unfortunately, are not addressed because too many teachers don't recognize that it is a problem. And unless they've been specially trained, which I just happened to be at the time, they won't know what to do. One of my favorite things was when a kid was really trying to act up or having a problem that was causing them to behave in a different kind of way, I would just call them to me and say, sit here for a moment. I just want to talk to you, and maybe we can have lunch together. Is that okay? And usually they would be so happy that I said, you can have lunch with me? Woo! That's a big deal. So they would talk to me about different things, but the first thing that I would do if they didn't want to talk is ask them, are you okay? And, do you feel well? You look as if you don't feel well, or you're behaving as if you don't feel well today. Is there something I can do to help you? Now that was a sympathy move that moved everybody, because it was like, oh, she sees me. She recognizes that there's something not right. I wish I could talk to her, okay? But I made it easy for them to approach me, and they used to come in during their lunch hours, which, like I was telling you, the administrators did not like that, because I would be in the classroom. I wouldn't go to lunch. I'd be in the classroom trying to beat out these, grades and stuff, so I don't have to take all this crap home.
Yeah.
So they would come in and they would help me, do the board, pick up the stuff, just talk.
Yep.
I found that in the process, like what you said, I was teaching very much like I learned. But when I was learning, it was like back in the 70s when I was going through that stuff. And we had a different attitude, because the other thing was to collectively get those kids together with a mindset to do something that only they could do. When I was in high school, I was on the Student Government Association. I was a senator for my classroom. And I was bringing stuff all the time. Oh, you know what? We need a newsletter. Oh, can we get the radio station to go in every classroom? Because we want to know what's going on here every day and who's having a party, and the music. So they would play, the loudspeaker would be our morning radio station that we were training people to learn how to be, not just whatever, DJs or, just being doing their cast. Whatever they would do, they loved it. Now that's what I was trying to bring to the schools, because it helps with the psychology, it helps with the self-esteem, and it improves relationships with all the kids. That one little thing, well, actually the student government too. But it was all kind of things that we ended up letting the kids decide. We had a fencing club, okay? People that did the sword and all that stuff, oh, they loved that. But it wasn't something the teachers came up with. It was something that the kids wanted to do, and nobody ever knew because they never asked. Even worse, they never listened to the kids and let them be a part of the policy-making issues that would improve the school system right here every day while we're here. We can make decisions because we're about to be grown-ups that we still don't know how to balance our bank book, which is something else they need to teach, by the way. I'm taking up all your time. I'm sorry.
No, thank you for sharing. And I think a lot of what you're speaking to is, one, the importance of building relationships with students so they're seen and heard, and putting their voices at the center of the learning experience to engage them in the learning process. And then I think you're also pointing out some of the challenges of being a teacher. Is when you're teaching or you're coaching, you are dealing with individuals, and every individual is unique, and everyone comes to the classroom or the playing field with different background, past traumas potentially, and those things are very difficult to manage. So when we talk about supporting educators or supporting schools, where sometimes people that make those decisions forget that you're dealing with people. And every single person has these different needs, and those needs take a lot of time. And a lot of time should be rewarded and funded appropriately, right? So thank you for sharing your 50 years. I'm sure there's more wisdom in there. So appreciate it. Sue, I saw you had your hand up. We have time for one more?
So I'm going to do this person right here, and then I'm
Sure.
going to
Oh, we
come
have
back
two
to
more.
Sue.
Great.
Would you like me to
Wonderful.
hold the mic for you?
My name is
Louie?
Ismail, and I'm a daughter of a teacher of 40 years.
Wow.
She taught AP Bio.
Okay.
And then COVID came.
Yep.
And she subbed for many years, and now she's 86. And she wishes she could be back in the classroom. But what I really want to say, I'm here out of serendipity. As a parent, I really wish, I am Montgomery County parent, and our kids went to college. And what was required? You got to get your AP classes. And my son Zechariah, I'm thinking about, he had AP classes, and none of the classes were about getting him outside of the class and getting him outside of the classroom. And even I was so frustrated that we're in Washington, D.C., and they don't discover the city, that in studying AP history, they don't go to the Capitol. They don't go to see the history of this country. Zechariah, it was only in college that he had a professor that inspired him to explore the environment. This young man, at 32 years old, he graduated in 2011, is a farmer because he risked his life. He's been arrested against the fossil fuel industry because once he learned outside the classroom, he saw what it meant, what was happening to the climate and to the environment. And it wasn't in the classroom. So I'm here to say, yes, the learning environment is critical, but I'm sad what I see today, like my neighborhood, the kids, they're not outside. They're not on bikes. They're not walking. They're not meeting. And I worry, what do you see as a teacher? And I'm glad to hear you're a high school teacher. What are you all doing to really, particularly post-pandemic, what are you doing to really you've shared a great deal, and I definitely want your book.
Thank you.
What are you doing to change the paradigm
Yeah.
to get teachers, schools, and more, that it doesn't take my son and our children not till they go to college, that they are able to explore more of what's outside.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing that story, and thank you for your question. And to answer your question, I think there is some good news happening in the educational landscape beneath the surface, and that is a shift that potentially can lead to more of the things that I write about in my book and that I did in my classroom, because I don't want what I did to be the exception. I think it should be perhaps the rule of what learning looks like for students. And that shift is a shift away from the siloed content that might be happening in an AP bio class. And I think a lot of people, and maybe parents in particular, say, oh, AP, that means college readiness, college bound. There's a level of rigor and prestige that comes with that. And I think there is some value in taking AP courses because of those possibilities. At the same time, and I'm speaking about my own experience, and I have taught some AP classes, is that sometimes you lose that contextualization and the learning that can take place from your neighborhood or in the city. And other educators and state offices around the country are recognizing that too, and they're starting to shift from these content acquisition models of an AP or a credit-based model and shifting more towards skills. So you'll maybe already heard of, or you'll start hearing more of these things called portraits of a graduate, or competencies, which is focusing more on skills or transferable skills that students are going to be explicitly taught in the classroom to allow them to be better prepared for college and career. And part of the reason that I wrote this book is because of the expeditionary learning framework that I utilize for these actions and approaches. I found a lot of benefits that you're speaking about with your son, about when you get outside of the classroom, engaged in the world around you, there's things that you learn that you cannot get from being in the classroom alone. And my hope is that people will pick up this book, teachers will pick up this book, and realize that this type of teaching is possible, because I think conceptually a lot of educators are on board with this type of teaching, but because of the day-to-day that entails to be a teacher, oftentimes they're at a loss for how to do it or what it looks like. So my hope and my wish is that the stories in this book will serve as a model and hopefully even some inspiration for educators to do just that. Thanks for your question.
He's been arrested for the environment, not because he's been arrested.
Civil disobedience.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, he's been arrested because he's fought against the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah, just to share a quick story about folks getting arrested for environmental causes. In the book, I write about an organization called We Act for Environmental Justice, which was started about 30 years ago by a group called the Sewage 7, and they chained themselves across the highway to protest the toxic fumes that were being released from a wastewater treatment plant in their neighborhood. And from there, that spurned an entire organization that's nationally, internationally known for fighting for environmental justice. So, I don't know if I could put myself on the line like that. I don't know if I'm as brave to do that. I mean, that takes a certain amount of courage to willingly know that you're going to be arrested. But some people, sometimes that maybe is what it takes, that we've seen it throughout our history. I mean, think about the civil rights era, right, where folks would go down and put themselves in the line for violence and physical harm. So I'm impressed. I'm a little bit inspired by that. Yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna go get arrested. I got a family at home, but yeah, I mean, Sue, you had a question, and if people have to go, I would no hard feelings, honestly, but.
Yeah, I'm going to get Sue right here, and then we're going to come back over to you.
Okay, Sue, thanks for being here. Hi.
I just had I'm joking now. I just had a question that actually occurred to me when I read the book, and, okay, you teach environmental science, you can see the outside stuff there. I teach history, I can see lots of ways of doing this. But what if I taught algebra or something like that? How does that sort of teacher make this meaningful?
Yeah, algebra and honors chem, I mean, yes, I think that's a good question, and also I think it brings up some potential limitations for teaching in this way for things that are very strict by the book. So I think in one way it may not work in all circumstances in all areas, but at the same time I would still encourage and push educators to think creatively and outside the box about how they can incorporate some of these practices. So for a math teacher, that might be if you're doing geometry, for example, or some type of engineering type concepts, maybe there's a bridge nearby. I know that's maybe overly simplistic, or maybe there's something outside in the hallway that you can measure that's a slope of a line and calculate it that way. So yes, I think it's more difficult in certain content areas and topics, but I think there's still value about thinking differently as an educator about how you can connect, regardless of the subject area of what you're teaching, to the world around you and the environment in which your students come from. So that would be my push, but very good question and potential critique. Indra, we want to add on?
Oh, you.
Yes, go ahead.
So I have a larger than me, but still small son. And their school focus is very heavily on experiential learning. You talked about expeditionary learning, and I think
They're kind of the same, yeah.
related.
Project-based learning is another one.
But they do take their kids out to a mountain campus where they look at the pond that's there and they do different science problems, math problems, like how can we measure the amount of liquid in this lake if we know X, Y, and Z, right? So I think there is a real sort of embracing of the fact that we need to move things out of the classroom. At least some of the time, right? So the application of it. And I didn't say this in the chemistry sort of spiel or story I gave earlier, but she took me on field trips to Hamilton College, which was nearby, and her husband taught there, and she showed me things, and we did things, and that was sort of part of like trying to get me to envision what these things as we're doing, and So I think there's a real to your question about how does math history get translated. I think it is maybe leaving the classroom or pointing out things outside of the classroom if you're constrained by administrators or whatever it is. Bringing the narrative, I didn't read it, FYI guys, I listened to the audio version, but taking those narratives that you had in your book, taking the experiences and making it real for students, even if you can't get outside.
Yeah, and that point that you make about going to visit the professor, that's another piece of it too. It's also about finding experts and professionals that you can bring into the classroom and connect students with as well.
And just to add, the algebra project under Bob Moses would have students go, like on the subway, travel one direction and then another, and think about positive and negative numbers. So I think, and they have a conference coming up, which the Bob Moses conference in his memory is coming up soon.
Hamilton grad, right, Indra? I think, Bob Moses? I think he was. Hello.
Hi, I just have one question.
Please.
What do you think is the future of history,
Oh, boy.
given the atmosphere that we're in now?
Yes, the future of history. Challenging times, indeed, for us now. I am, for better or worse, an eternal optimist. And I recently read a book called Active Hope. And that book was by Joanna Macy and Chris Johnson. Specifically rated about climate change and in the environment, but I think has application maybe to history as well. And I think that if you're finding the current climate of our country and the political situation disheartening and demoralizing, and it's okay to grieve and find space for that if that's how you're feeling. But at the same time, if we want to shape the future of history, And I think this goes back to the point that you're making in our conversation, Sue, is that you can only do what's within your center and locus of control and act in a way that is a way that you want to see the world in the future, even if that means that you might not live to see the fruits of your labor, so to speak. So what I try to do for the future, and I don't know if this answers your question, but I can only live in that ideal of active hope and putting these ideas out there. And I'm a science teacher and a father, so this is what I know. And this is what I'm going to focus on to try to make a world a little better. And that may be cliche and oversimplistic, but when I start thinking about the overarching things, it's overwhelming. And we need to take time and space and places to feel that weight so we continue to act. So that's my answer to that question. With the future of history.
That could be a book title, actually. Okay, this can be our last question, and then we'll...
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I can say to that is that I know educators are going to show up for kids because that's what teachers do. That's what coaches do. We show up for kids every single day with our colleagues, and we do our best to meet the need of the students in front of us. What I'm not sure about is if we as a society are going to show up for educators. And that's why having conversations and organizations like Teach for Change are important, to be able to support educators and coaches in the work that they do and build a momentum and hopefully push back against the things that are happening that are defunding and demoralizing educators. So I don't have an answer to that. I can only, like I said, do what I can do within my context, but I'll join with you in partnership to support. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, being a teacher is impossible, is an nearly impossible profession because of all of the larger societal issues that show up in a school. And that's part of the conversation for change, I think, as well, is helping people realize that societal pressures infiltrate into the school building. And how we're going to solve that, I'm with you on that. I'm not totally sure, but I do know that educators are going to do their best to show up for kids, and that we need to start showing up for educators a little bit better. Yeah.
And I think with that, we'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this amazing
getting into it.
conversation. No, we got a little deep at the end there, but that's what you get with an intimate
questions.
setting. We get even more intimate conversation and rich conversation.
Come get a book. If you don't have one, buy one for your friends.
Yes,
Support
yes.
politics, Busboys and Poets,
yes.
which talks about politics and community and culture.
Yes, and it does really make a difference when you purchase from your local independent bookstore. So if you are going to get the book, we do encourage you to do so here with us today. It's also a special opportunity as Dr. Fox is here and will be signing copies. So with that, please make sure you close out your tab as well and tip your server if you think we did a good job. And have a great rest of your night. Thank you.
And shout out to the live stream if you're still with us.
If you are tuning in on the live stream before we end it, you will be able to get a signed copy. We're going to have Dr. Fox sign over at the leftovers. So if you want to pick up one from your local Busboys and Poets, you can get a signed copy here. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, Bernie.